Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Knowledge is power. Information is liberating. But education is not just about going to school and getting a degree. Education is the premise of progress in every society. It is the passport to the future. A good education system must improve society. When an education does not improve the general life of citizens, that education system must be reformed.
We have reformed our higher and tertiary education system. And these are the principles that guide us in the reform of our higher and tertiary education system. First of all, I have to say, the aim of our higher and tertiary education, science and technology development system is to give birth to a prosperous Zimbabwe, a Zimbabwe free from hate, a Zimbabwe free from violence, a Zimbabwe free from preventable diseases, a democratic Zimbabwe through the production of goods and services. Our aim is to improve the quality of life of Zimbabweans. An education system that does not produce goods and services is not useful at all. We always say we don't want a cloud that does not bear water. We also don't like a well that does not have water. These are the guiding principles that we use in order to reform this higher tertiary education system. We cannot have an education system that does not produce people that lead to the industrialization and modernization of this country. An education system that is outside the environment in which it must serve and transform is not useful at all. So if we have to transform Zimbabwe, if we have to modernize this country and industrialize this country, we need an education system that understands that we are in Zimbabwe, we are in Africa. As we move forward and we move our country forward, we have to know that we cannot develop a country using 5 senses. This is a very important point, that we cannot develop a country using 5 senses. All animals have 5 senses. Gudo, rine 5 senses. Tsoko, ine 5 senses. So say this madoroba. It basically means as human, we are deeper than 5 senses. As Zimbabweans move their countries forward, what we have to know that what differentiates us as humans from all the animals is what we call consciousness. As Zimbabweans, we have to be conscious that we are Zimbabweans. We need to have deep consciousness to develop and move our country forward. First of all, consciousness means, who are we? Where do we come from? What are our aspirations? What are our national interests? If we have an education system that feeds on deep consciousness of who we are, what we want, the national interests of Zimbabwe, we will move Zimbabwe forward. So these are basically the principles that are making us reform our higher and tertiary education system. So, before I go any further, I want to explain 2 very important concepts. One is what is called systems, maitiro, and design, kuronga kana urongwa. The systems and design of systems is everything in this world. Kuronga zvinhu zvenyu is everything in this world. Any game is lost or won in its design. Ukanzi huya titambe game rosingazivi kuti rinotambwa sei uye rakatangwa nani, unoroza game iroro. You cannot prosper using a system that you never participated in designing. That's exactly the basis why we need and we are reforming the higher and tertiary education system. We lived in a colonial design for nearly 100 years. One thing which is very important is that the colonial design was never meant for our benefit. So if we maintain it, we continue losing. We are developing our own designs. Africa has to know that we cannot develop based on the very same design that led to our exploitation. Colonized systems are like cages, where cage fights occur within the cage, and the designer and maker of the cage watches the fight and laughs while making sure that you do not get out of the cage. We are in a cage. Colonized systems are cages. Colonies are cages. Cages that were designed. Some of us, when you look at conflicts in Africa, you know, when you're in a cage, people put you in a cage and they know you are in there. You fight in that cage. As soon as you want to get out of the cage, you get rebuked. Hey, go back to the cage. So as long as we understand that we are in a cage and that our liberation means getting out of the cage, we are out and going. And this is exactly how we are reforming Zimbabwe's it's a higher tertiary education system. The colonial systems organized a cage for cage fights for Africans. We have to be aware of all of this all the time, basically. We have to get out of this cage. Every time you receive rebuke from the colonial system, remember it indicates you are trying to bolt out of the cage. When you see that happening, persevere, because it is likely to be the best thing that you are doing for your country. Remember, when we talk about struggle and revolution, we are talking about getting out of the cage. Our struggle is about getting out of the shackles in the cage where we have been put. And sometimes, you know, when you're in a cage and somebody puts you in a cage, and then you will fight until you're tired in that cage. When you're tired, they give you more food so that you continue the fight. As soon as you want to get out of that cage, they will say, hey, why are you trying to get out of the cage? I think I'm explaining myself very well. That when you want to design your own systems, you are always disturbed sometimes. People say, but we have this other one. But we have this other one. No. Design your own system. Own it. But if people want to join you in that system that you have designed, they are always welcome. So, this cage that we are in sometimes results in self-hate, self-degradation, lack of self-confidence. This is the self-hate that happens in a cage. That's what really shows that we are in a cage. And our purpose of our higher education system is basically to get out of the cage. That's what we want to do. So we need a design that makes us get out of the cage. The cage where poverty prevails, where self-hate prevails, where lack of self-confidence prevails. These are some of the principles that we are using to reform our education agenda. Our education produces goods and services. I remember when His Excellency called me to become the Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, Science and Technology Development, we had a very interesting discussion. One of the things that he said, Comrade Idi Mnangagwa said, we want an education that produces goods and services. So, if the education that we have did not produce goods and services, it means it might not be following the design that we want. So, if an education is not producing goods and services, it basically means you have to go back to its design and see how it is designed. If it's not designed to produce that, then we make sure that we redesign it. So the first thing then that we did was to start by doing what we call the Zimbabwe Critical Skills Audit. And it resulted in a document that we call the Zimbabwe National Skills Audit. Why did we have to do this? We wanted to find out what are the skills levels of Zimbabwe, because we are pursuing Vision 2030, where we want a modernized and industrialized Zimbabwe. The last skills audit in Zimbabwe had been done in 1981 and was only published in 1984, which means four years later. But all these years, we have not been having any skills audit. And under the government of ED, Comrade Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, His Excellency the President, we did this skills audit starting from December, and by April we were done. And this is the summary of the results. 1. In terms of our skills, average Zimbabwe's skills levels are at 38%. Interesting. However, when we look at our literacy levels, they are at 94%. It means our education was producing very literate people. It's an advantage in itself. But you can't stop on the foundation. You have to continue building the skyscraper. The joining point is the joining point of skills. So we needed it. I always use the example of the motto of Midland State University, where we say, our minds, our hands, and our destiny. Basically, that means our mind has to be connected to the hands so that we produce goods and services that are required in this country for this country's progress. We cannot have a country where we talk and not do. And we cannot have a country where we do without thinking. So basically, we need both. So basically then, what we then did was to look at the engineering sector, and we discovered that the engineering sector, we only have skills availability of 6%, but skills deficit of 94%. In natural and applied sciences, we have skills levels of 3% and skills deficit of 97%. We then looked at business and commerce. Here we have a bit of a surplus of 21% in skills. But agriculture, which is supposed to be the mainstay of our economy, we have a skills deficit of 88% and skills availability of 12%. And I say sometimes, let's not be surprised while our yields are low. We are having yields as low as 1 ton per hectare in maize in this country. And we must move that forward. Basically, in medical and health sciences, our skills levels are at 5% and deficit of 95%. In humanities, the skills levels are at 82% and a moderate deficit of minus 18%. What basically this means, therefore, is that this is the basis upon which we will plan Zimbabwe's future, Zimbabwe's industrialization and modernization agenda. If you don't know the gap, you might not know how to make an exit. Our exit is an exit out of the cage. You remember I'm talking about the cage. And you design your systems so that Zimbabwe gets out of the cage. The time it gets out of the cage, it goes into an upper middle income economy and beyond through modernization and industrialization. So, our education system that we inherited in 1980 emphasized literacy. So our universities were doing 3 things: research, teaching, and community service. What does this mean? People will do research so that they produce an article to teach. And then people will do research to produce an article to go and present at a conference. That's community outreach. So you can see from this design, which I want to call Education 3.0, because it has got 3 aims. It has got 3 terms of references: teaching, research, and community engagement. To expect that this education system will produce goods and services is expecting too much, because in the first place, those terms of references are not there. So how do you expect a consultant to give you a result based on no terms of reference? So in other words, what we have said is that this 3.0 is a colonial design, and it worked perfect during that time. Why did it work perfect? In the colonial master's country, the universities were doing teaching, research, community outreach, innovation, and industrialization. So, universities like Cambridge, like Oxford, would be thinking about how to make steel, and they design plants, steel plants, like Zisco, our own Zisco. Then the Zisco would then be transferred to the colony for production of steel. No problem. But then the university in Rhodesia, people had just to learn good English and a bit of engineering so that they're able to run the system. But remember, run the system, but not design the system. So if you run a system that you never designed, if it gets broken down, it means you have to refer back to base, back to center. My subject is about design of systems, and design of systems that get out of the cage. So here in Zimbabwe, the university would then be teaching research and community service. It means they are ready to go and work. Education 3.0 produces a worker who then waits to go and work at Zisco Stilia Pasa. But yet, it was produced by a university which is somewhere. As far as we know, the university is a place, or the polytechnic is a place, where people think, design, and deploy for the development of their country. But our universities were given less terms of reference so that we don't industrialize and innovate, because that was not the intention of the colonial cage. The colonial cage was going to produce a worker, and that worker had to speak good English so that you can communicate with the bursar, so that it tells you what to do in the industry, but you don't know where it is coming from. To the extent that you find out that the language that is then used now is, I finished school, give me a job. I thought I was training a giant. When a giant is trained, we must get solutions from that giant. But it is in the design. It's not in the mental makeup of our people. Our people have a very good mental makeup, extremely good, but we're following a wrong design. So basically, the universities elsewhere in those developed countries are doing from idea to product, while our universities are stuck in idea to idea to idea to idea. I call it going round and round in a round hat and going nowhere. So basically, the system is in the design. Because when you take a Zimbabwe, after our education, you put them into country X, they do very well, extremely well. Why? Because they've gone to a designed system. So they will fit very well in that design. But this is not the question that we want at this moment. We are now in an independent Zimbabwe. And independent Zimbabwe means one thing. And independent Zimbabwe means now we have to get dirty. Independence by definition means work. What do we mean when we are talking like that? We are saying independence always looks like a jacket or an overalls with grease. It means work. That basically means our design has to respect the fact that we are independent. When a child says, I am now grown up, you give them the pots to go and cook themselves. When they come back to your house, then it means there's a problem in terms of the training. So what we are basically saying is that our education system must be a good daddy, has to be a good endeavor that produces experts. So the design of our education system, as we can see, it was based on 1, bottlenecks, 2, on things of teaching, research, and community service, which was going round and round, and so forth and so on. So this education system had to be reconfigured. Therefore, ourselves, we have adopted a heritage-based philosophy to guide the implementation of our education programs. So our education system must now move away from just analysis. You know, sometimes people do analysis paralysis. What does that mean, analysis? There's a pothole on the road. People get to the pothole, they say, there's a pothole. It's very deep. If you come with your car, I don't think it can pass this pothole. In actual fact, this pothole is about 13 centimeters deep and is about 2 meters wide. This pothole. What is the conclusion of analyzing people? They will say, that's an education that does analysis. Or kunzima. But the conclusion of an education system that is a purpose should be analysis and creation. Then the next thing must be, how do we fill the pothole? So we are moving towards an education system that moves to analysis and creation, not only analysis. I've been talking now to my students at some point about Twitter noises. Twitter noises, in Zimbabwe, people are on Twitter. A lot, isn't it? Because they are literate. But do we understand? Is another issue. Yes, you can read. That's why sometimes even people end up in fuel queues because of a tweet. But that shows that they've seen the tweet, they've read, but they've not understood that this is fake. So that's what we mean. Our education is to move towards analysis and creation, and it should move towards production of goods and services. What we are basically saying is that we must therefore create a new design that makes sure we produce goods and services in our education. Remember, we are always saying an education system that is outside of the environment which it must serve and transform is not useful at all. Why do you have an education that does not give us food? Why do you need an education that does not give us goods, that does not give us services, that cannot modernize the country, that produces a worker, not an industrialist? I'm just saying what is making us reform the higher and tertiary education system. We have to know why we have to reform. We don't have to reform for reform's sake. We reform in order to move Zimbabwe forward. And this is very important to us. So this education, which has teaching, research, community engagement, innovation, and industrialization, means that we will then have to look at our education and make sure that our people have skills, our people have knowledge. Our students, when they get out of our system, have to be people that are ready to provide for this country in terms of goods and services. So, we then went on further to say, what do we really have to do? We said, no, let's reassign our universities new terms of reference, which we now call Education 5.0, from idea to product.